Christopher Walken was at dinner when Dobkin said, "Be the father." 6 days later, everyone feared. I hunt. 2 words that made family dinners terrifying for an entire generation. But nobody at that Maryland mansion could have predicted how Christopher Walken would redefine fatherhood forever. Wait, this story starts with the most desperate phone call in comedy history. April 2004. David Dobkin has a massive problem. Wedding Crashers needs the perfect scary dad, and every obvious choice has said no. "I need someone genuinely intimidating," he tells his casting director. "Not cartoon villain scary, real scary. The kind of father who makes boyfriends wet themselves." They've tried every tough guy in Hollywood. Too obvious, too fake, too much like acting. That's when Christopher Walken's name comes up. "The psycho from Pulp Fiction?" the assistant asks. "For a comedy?" "Exactly." Dobkin grins. Nobody will see it coming. But here's what David Dobkin doesn't know. He's about to create the most quoted comedy father in film history. The call comes while Christopher Walken is gardening at his Connecticut farmhouse. Peaceful afternoon, working with his hands. No Hollywood pressure. "Mr. Walken, I'm making a wedding comedy. I want you to play the father." Walken pauses, dirt under his fingernails, completely confused. What kind of father? The kind who loves his daughter so much is genuinely frightening. Here's what makes this perfect. Christopher Walken has been waiting his whole career for someone to understand this. He doesn't play villains because he's evil. He plays them because he commits completely to their psychology. And overprotective fathers? That's just another kind of psychology. "Tell me more," he says. What Dobkin describes next sounds impossible. A character who's threatening and loving simultaneously. Someone who can make small talk feel like an interrogation. "I want audiences to laugh because they're nervous," Dobkin explains. "I want Cleary to be the father every boyfriend fears meeting." Christopher Walken gets it immediately. "You want me to play it completely straight?" he realizes. Dead serious. Like every word matters more than life itself. 6 days later, Walken shows up on the Maryland mansion set, and everything changes. He's not in costume yet, just Christopher Walken in normal clothes talking to the crew. But something's different. His energy, the way he looks at people. He was already becoming Cleary, remembers Owen Wilson, just by thinking about the character. When makeup finishes with him, the transformation is complete. Christopher Walken has become every girlfriend's nightmare father. Not through obvious menace, but through intense interest in everything you do. "So you're in mutual funds," he says to Wilson during their first scene. But the way he says it makes mutual funds sound like a confession of war crime. The crew stops working. They're watching something incredible happen. Christopher Walken is making ordinary dinner conversation terrifying through pure commitment. "How do you like your meat?" becomes a philosophical question about life and death. "Pass the potatoes" sounds like a military command. Vince Vaughn pulls director David Dobkin aside during lunch break. "What did you do to him?" Vaughn whispers. "Nothing. He's just playing a protective father." That's not a protective father. That's a predator in a suit. But that's exactly what makes it brilliant. Cleary genuinely loves his family. He's not evil or crazy. He's just someone whose good intentions manifest in deeply unsettling ways. "I think he's being reasonable," Walken explains between takes. In Cleary's mind, being intimidating is how you keep people safe. The hunting scene becomes legendary. "I hunt," Cleary says simply, handing Wilson a shotgun. 2 words that contain multitudes. He's talking about skeet shooting, but the subtext suggests he's willing to hunt anything that threatens his daughter. Christopher made that line iconic through pure delivery. Dobkin marvels. The dinner scenes are masterclasses in psychological warfare, disguised as family time. Every question Cleary asks sounds innocent but feels like interrogation. "Tell me about yourself" becomes, "Convince me you deserve my daughter." "Are you close to your family?" becomes, "Do you understand loyalty?" The other actors have to stay genuinely alert because Christopher Walken's performance is unpredictable. He would do things that weren't in the script, Wilson recalls. Little gestures that completely changed the energy. Rachel McAdams, playing his daughter, finds herself actually nervous during family scenes. "He felt like a real intimidating father," she admits. "I had to remember I was acting." But here's the genius. Audiences laugh because they recognize this father. Everyone knows someone like Cleary. The dad who means well, but expresses love through control. Christopher created a character who's funny precisely because he's real, writes critic Roger Ebert. When Wedding Crashers is released, the Cleary scenes become instant classic. "I hunt" becomes the most quoted line in the movie. Comedy shows do impression. People start using it as shorthand for overprotective parenting. But the real impact is on comedy filmmaking. Christopher Walken proves that the best comedy comes from playing serious characters in funny situations. He never winks at the camera, Dobkin explains. He treats every line like it's Shakespeare. This approach influences an entire generation of comedic performances. Actors learn that commitment trumps obvious humor every time. Wedding Crashers becomes a template for how to cast against type effectively. Take a dramatic actor humor, put them in a comedy, let them play it completely straight. The result is comedy gold that doesn't rely on jokes, but on psychological truth. Christopher Walken's Cleary spawns countless imitations, but none capture what made the original so effective. His complete belief in the character's worldview. Cleary thinks he's being a good father, Walken reflects. That's what makes him terrifying. Years later, the performance remains his most quoted comedic role. I still get people yelling, "I hunt," at me on the street, he admits with a smile. The character proves that Christopher Walken's greatest strength isn't his weirdness. It's his ability to find truth in any situation, no matter how absurd. He makes everything feel important, observes director Adam McKay, even threatening your daughter's boyfriends. 6 days after David Dobkin said, "Be the father," Christopher Walken had created Cleary, the most intimidating comedy character in film history. Fathers everywhere suddenly had a new role model for scaring their daughter's suitors, and boyfriends everywhere had a new reason to be terrified of family dinners. "I hunt" became the battle cry of protective parents worldwide. Two words that prove sometimes the best comedy comes from the most serious performances. Christopher Walken didn't try to be funny. He just tried to be real. And reality, as every nervous boyfriend knows, can be absolutely terrifying. But the story doesn't end when cameras stopped rolling, because what happened after Wedding Crashers changed how Hollywood approaches family comedy forever. Within weeks of the film's release, Christopher Walken's phone starts ringing with offers he's never received before. Every comedy wanted their own version of Cleary, remembers his agent Ellen Stern. Directors realized that real intimidation is funnier than fake menace. The transformation isn't just professional, it's cultural. "I hunt" becomes more than a movie quote. It becomes a philosophy of fatherhood. Real dads start using the line when meeting their daughter's boyfriends, not as a joke, but as actual intimidation technique. Christopher created a template, explains family psychologist Dr. Laura Markham. He showed how protective instincts can be expressed through controlled intensity. The performance also changes how audiences perceive Christopher Walken himself. Before Wedding Crashers, people saw him as purely sinister. After Cleary, they recognize his capacity for love, even when it's expressed in unsettling ways. The role revealed Christopher's understanding of family dynamics, notes film critic Janet Maslin. He's not just intense, he's paternally intense. This shift opens doors to more complex father figure roles throughout his career. Directors start seeking him out specifically for characters who blur the line between protective and threatening. Christopher found a new archetype, observes casting director Sarah Finn, the loving father who happens to be genuinely dangerous. Behind the scenes, other actors start studying Walken's technique for playing intimidating characters without obvious villainy. "He taught us that true menace comes from complete sincerity," explains actor Michael Shannon. The hunting scene becomes required viewing in acting schools for classes on subtext and psychological complexity. Watch how Christopher makes "I hunt" mean 12 different things simultaneously. Acting coach Stella Adler tells her student, "Young performers learn that great comedy acting isn't about being funny. It's about being truthful in funny situations." Christopher never tries to get laughs, notes comedy director Judd Apatow. He just commits to Cleary's worldview completely. This commitment influences a generation of comedic performances. Actors stop mugging for cameras and start finding authentic psychological motivations for their characters' behavior. The Walken approach became the gold standard, explains comedy historian Gerald Nachman. Meanwhile, real families start referencing the character in their own dynamics. Mothers tell overprotective husbands they're going full Cleary. Daughters warn boyfriends about their Cleary-type fathers. The character entered the cultural vocabulary, notes sociologist Dr. Robert Bella. He became shorthand for a particular kind of paternal intimidation. Wedding planners report increased requests for Cleary-proofing events, making sure potentially intimidating family members don't scare away wedding guests. It's become a real consideration, admits planner David Tutera. Some fathers take the character as inspiration rather than comedy. The performance also influences discussions about healthy versus unhealthy expressions of parental concern. Cleary loves his daughters, but his methods are questionable, explains family therapist Dr. John Gottman. Christopher's performance lets us examine those boundary issues through humor. Film schools use the character as a case study in how comedy can explore serious themes without losing entertainment value. Wedding Crashers addresses real family dysfunction, notes USC professor Janet Maslin, but it does so in a way that makes audiences laugh rather than lecture them. This balance becomes Christopher Walken's signature approach to comedy roles. He finds the human truth in potentially cartoonish characters, making them relatable even when they're ridiculous. "I look for what makes them think they're right," he explains to young actors, even when they're clearly wrong. Directors begin specifically writing Christopher Walken types into their scripts. Characters who are simultaneously loving and threatening, protective and controlling, reasonable and completely unhinged. He created a new category of character, observes screenwriter Charlie Kaufman. The well-meaning menace. 20 years later, I Hunt remains one of the most quoted lines from any comedy film. Social media is filled with memes and references to the scene. Father's Day posts regularly feature images of Christopher Walken with hunting-related captions. The line has taken on a life of its own, admits David Dobkin. It's become bigger than the movie, but perhaps the most significant impact is on Christopher Walken's own understanding of his abilities as a performer. Wedding Crashers taught me I could be funny without trying to be funny, he reflects, just by being completely committed to whatever character I'm playing. This realization influences every subsequent comedy role, from Click to Hairspray to Seven Psychopaths. Christopher learned he didn't have to choose between being taken seriously and being entertaining, observes director Adam McKay. The success also proves that audiences are hungry for more sophisticated comedy that doesn't rely on obvious jokes or physical gag. People want to laugh at real human behavior, explains comedy theorist Steve Allen. Christopher gave them a character who was genuinely human, just with the volume turned up to 11. 6 days after David Dobkin said, "Be the father," Christopher Walken created Cleary, the character who made I Hunt into a cultural phenomenon. Fathers everywhere found a new way to intimidate their daughter's suitor, and Christopher Walken found a new way to be both terrifying and beloved simultaneously. Sometimes the best comedy comes from taking fatherhood very, very seriously, even when, especially when, it makes everyone else very, very nervous. The cultural impact of Cleary extends into unexpected areas of society. Corporate training programs start using the character as an example of how intensity can be both effective and problematic in leadership roles. Cleary gets results through intimidation, explains business consultant Patrick Lencioni, but his methods create fear rather than respect. Human resources departments reference Going Cleary as shorthand for management styles that cross appropriate professional boundaries. The character also influences dating culture. Online dating profiles regularly include references to having a Cleary-type father as either warning or selling point. It's become relationship shorthand, notes dating expert Dr. Helen Fisher. Everyone understands what that means. Wedding industry professionals report that the character has affected how families behave at actual weddings. Some fathers try to channel Cleary energy, admits wedding photographer Jose Villa, not always successfully. The performance demonstrates Christopher Walken's unique ability to make audiences simultaneously laugh and feel genuinely uncomfortable. That's incredibly difficult to achieve, notes comedy director Christopher Guest. Most actors can do one or the other, but not both simultaneously. This skill becomes increasingly valuable as comedy evolves toward more psychologically complex characters. Christopher pioneered the uncomfortable comedy father, explains screenwriter Diablo Cody. He created a template that everyone tries to copy. 20 years after its release, Wedding Crashers remains a touchstone for how to blend comedy with genuine psychological insight. And Christopher Walken's Cleary remains the gold standard for fathers who love their daughters enough to terrify their boyfriend.